All right, guys, we're on book 6, chapter 23 of The Godfather. About 25 pages in this chapter, so we're just going to maybe read 10 pages, do this in parts. Okay, cool. We have Michael Corleone going to be in the mix here. So chapter 23. After 5 months of exile in Sicily, Michael Corleone came finally to understand his father's character and his destiny. He came to understand men like Luca Brasi, the ruthless capo regime Clemenza, his mother's resignation and acceptance of her role. For in Sicily he saw what they would have been if they had chosen not to struggle against their fate. He understood why the Don always said, "A man has only one destiny." He came to understand the contempt for authority and legal government, the hatred for any man who broke omerta, the law of silence. Dressed in old clothes and a billed cap, Michael had been transported from the ship dock at Palermo to the interior of the Sicilian island, to the very heart of a province controlled by the mafia, where the local capo mafioso was greatly indebted to his father for some past service. The province held the town of Corleone, whose name the Don had taken when he emigrated to America so long ago. But there were no longer any of the Don's relatives alive. The women had died of old age. All the men had been killed in vendettas or had also emigrated, either to America, Brazil, or to some other province on the Italian mainland. He was to learn later that this small poverty-stricken town had the highest murder rate of any place in the world. Michael was installed as a guest in the home of a bachelor uncle of the capo mafioso. The uncle in his 70s was also the doctor for the district. The capo mafioso was a man in his late 50s named Don Tomasino, and he operated as the Gabellotto for a huge estate belonging to one of Sicily's most noble families. The Gabellotto, a sort of overseer to the estates of the rich, also guaranteed that the poor would not try to claim land not being cultivated, would not try to encroach in any way on the estate by poaching or trying to farm it as squatters. In short, the Gabellotto was a mafioso who for a certain sum of money protected the real estate of the rich from all claims made on it by the poor, legal or illegal. When any poor peasant tried to implement the law which permitted him to buy uncultivated land, the Gabellotto frightened him off with threats of bodily harm or death. It was that simple. Don Tomasino also controlled the water rights in the area and vetoed the local building of any new dams by Roman government. Such dams would ruin the lucrative business of selling water from the artisan or from the artesian wells he controlled. Make water too cheap, ruin the whole important water economy so laboriously built up over hundreds of years. However, Don Tomasino was an old-fashioned mafia chief and would have nothing to do with dope, traffic, or prostitution. And this Don Tomasino was at odds with the new breed of mafia leaders springing up in big cities like Palermo. New men who, influenced by American gangsters deported to Italy, had no such scruples. The mafia chief was an extremely portly man, a man with a belly, literally as well as in the figurative sense. That meant a man able to inspire fear in his fellow men. Under his protection, Michael had nothing to fear, yet it was considered necessary to keep the fugitive's identity a secret, and so Michael was restricted to the walled estate of Dr. Taza, the Don's uncle. Dr. Taza was tall for a Sicilian, almost 6 feet, and had ruddy cheeks and snow-white hair. Though in his 70s, he went every week to Palermo to pay his respects to the younger prostitutes of that city. The younger the better. Dr. Taza's other vice was reading. He read everything and talked about what he read to his fellow townsmen, patients who were illiterate peasants, the estate shepherds, and this gave him a local reputation for foolishness. What did books have to do with them? In the evenings, Dr. Taza, Don Tomasino, and Michael sat in the huge garden populated with those marble statues that on this island seemed to grow out of the garden as magically as the black, heady grapes. Dr. Taza loved to tell stories about the mafia and its exploits over the centuries, and in Michael Corleone, he had a fascinated listener. There were times when even Don Tomasino would be carried away by the balmy air, the fruity, intoxicating wine, the elegant and quiet comfort of the garden, and tell a story from his own practical experience. The doctor was the legend, the Don the reality. In this antique garden, Michael Corleone learned about the roots from which his father grew, that the word mafia had originally meant place of refuge. Then it became the name for the secret organization that sprang up to fight against the rulers who had crushed the country and its people for centuries. Sicily was a land that had been more cruelly raped than any other in history. The Inquisition had tortured rich and poor alike. The land-owning barons and the princes of the Catholic Church exercised absolute power over the shepherds and farmers. The police were the instruments of their power, and so identified with them that to be called a policeman is the foulest insult one Sicilian can hurl at another. So to be called a policeman. So mafia meant a place of refuge. Mafia had originally meant a place of refuge. Faced with the savagery of this absolute power, these suffering people learned never to betray their anger and their hatred for fear of being crushed. They learned never to make themselves vulnerable by uttering any sort of threat, since giving such a warning ensured a quick reprisal. They learned that society was their enemy, and so when they sought redress for their wrongs, they went to the rebel underground, the mafia, and the mafia cemented its power by originating the law of silence, the omerta. In the countryside of Sicily, a stranger asking directions to the nearest town will not even receive courtesy of an answer. And the greatest crime any member of the mafia could commit would be to tell the police the name of the man who had just shot him or done him any kind of injury. Omerta became the religion of the people. A woman whose husband had been murdered would not tell the police the name of her husband's murderer, not even of her child's murderer, her daughter's raper. Justice had never been forthcoming from the authorities, and so the people had always gone to the Robin Hood Mafia, and to some extent the mafia still unfulfilled this role. People turned to their local capo mafioso for help in every emergency. He was a social worker, their district captain ready with a basket of food and a job, the protector. But what Dr. Taza did not add, what Michael learned on his own in the months that followed, was that the mafia in Sicily had become the illegal arm of the rich, and even the auxiliary police of the legal and political structure, had become a degenerate capitalist structure, anti-communist, anti-liberal, placing its own taxes on every form of business endeavor, no matter how small. Michael Corleone understood for the first time why men like his father chose to become thieves and murderers rather than members of the legal society. The poverty and fear and degradation were too awful to be acceptable to any man of spirit, and in America some emigrating Sicilian had assumed there would be an equally cruel authority. Dr. Taza offered to take Michael into Palermo with him on his weekly visit to the bordello, but Michael refused. I want to stop there. That might be a little bit of justification. For murder. I don't know. They don't murder rude people, but they do influence young people to join them, His flight to Sicily had prevented him from getting proper medical treatment for his smashed jaw, and he now carried a memento from Captain McCluskey on the left side of his face. The bones had knitted badly, throwing his profile askew, giving him the appearance of depravity when viewed from that side. He had always been vain about his looks, and this upset him more than he thought possible. The pain that came and went he didn't mind at all. Dr. Taza gave him some pills that deadened it. Taza offered to treat his face, but Michael refused. He had been there long enough to learn that Dr. Taza was perhaps the worst physician in Sicily. Dr. Taza read everything but his medical literature, which he admitted he could not understand. He had passed his medical exams through the good offices of the most important mafia chief in Sicily, who had made a special trip to Palermo to confer with Taza's professors about what grades they should give him. And this too showed how the mafia in Sicily was cancerous to the society it inhabited. Merit meant nothing. Talent meant nothing. Work meant nothing. The mafia godfather gave you your profession as a gift. Michael had plenty of time to think things out. During the day, he took walks in the countryside, always accompanied by two of the shepherds attached to Don Tomasino's estate. The shepherds of the island were often recruited to act as the mafia's hired killers and did their job simply to earn money to live. Michael thought about his father's organization. If it continued to prosper, it would grow into what had happened here on the island, so cancerous that it would destroy the whole country. Sicily was already a land of ghosts, its men emigrating to every other country on earth to be able to earn their bread, or simply to escape being murdered for exercising their political and economic freedoms. I kind of respect Mario for mentioning this. On his long walks, the most striking thing in Michael's eyes was the magnificent beauty of the country. He walked through the orange orchards that formed shady, deep caverns through the countryside with their ancient conduits splashing water out of the fanged mouths of great snake stones carved before Christ. Houses built like ancient Roman villas with huge marble portals and great vaulted rooms falling into ruins or inhabited by stray sheep. On the horizon, the bony hills shone like picked, bleached bones piled high. Gardens and fields, sparkly green, decorated the desert landscape like bright emerald necklaces. And sometimes he walked as far as the town of Corleone, its 18,000 people strung out in dwellings that pitted the side of the nearest mountain. the mean hovels built out of black rock quarried from that mountain. In the last year there had been over 60 murders in Corleone, and it seemed that death shadowed the town. Further on, the wood of Fukuza broke the savage monotony of arable plain, A-R-A-B-L-E, arable plain. His two shepherd bodyguards always carried their luparas with them when accompanying Michael on his walks. Luparas, I don't know, it's a gun, a stick. The deadly Sicilian shotgun was the favorite weapon of the mafia. Indeed, the police chief sent by Mussolini to clean the mafia out of Sicily had, as one of his first steps, ordered all stone walls in Sicily to be knocked down to not more than 3 feet in height, so that murderers with their luparas could not use the walls as ambush points for their assassinations. This didn't help much, and the police minister solved his problem by arresting and deporting to penal colonies any male suspected of being a mafioso. When the island of Sicily was liberated by the Allied armies, the American military government officials believed that anyone imprisoned by the fascist regime was a Democrat, and many of these mafiosi were appointed as mayors of villages or interpreters to the military government. This good fortune enabled the mafia to reconstitute itself and become more formidable than ever before. The long walks, a bottle of strong wine at night with a heavy plate of pasta and meat, enabled Michael to sleep. There were books in Italian in Dr. Taz's library, and though Michael spoke dialect Italian, and had taken some college courses in Italian, his reading of these books took a great deal of effort and time. His speech became almost accentless, and though he could never pass as a native of the district, it would be believed that he was one of those strange Italians from the far north of Italy bordering the Swiss and Germans. The distortion of the left side of his face made him more native. It was a kind of disfigurement common in Sicily because of the lack of medical care, the little injury that cannot be patched up simply for lack of money. Many children, many men, bore disfigurements that in America would have been repaired by minor surgery or sophisticated medical treatments. Michael often thought of Kay, of her smile, her body, and always felt a twinge of conscience at leaving her so brutally without a word of farewell. Oddly enough, his conscience was never troubled by the 2 men he had murdered. Salazzo had tried to kill his father. Captain McCluskey had disfigured him for life. Dr. Taza always kept after him about getting surgery done for his lopsided face, especially when Michael asked him for pain-killing drugs, the pain getting worse as time went on and more frequent. Taza explained that there was a facial nerve below the eye from which radiated a whole complex of nerves. Indeed, this was the favorite spot for mafia torturers, who searched it out on the cheeks of their victims with the needle-fine point of an ice pick. That particular nerve in Michael's face had been injured, or perhaps there was a splinter of bone lanced into it. Simple surgery in a Palermo hospital would permanently relieve the pain. Michael refused when the doctor asked why. Michael grinned and said, "It's something from home." And he really didn't mind the pain, which was more an ache, a small throbbing in his skull, like a motored apparatus running in liquid to purify it. Like a motored. It was nearly 7 months of leisurely rustic living before Michael felt real boredom. At about this time, Don Tomasino became very busy and was seldom seen at the villa. He was having his troubles with the new mafia springing up in Palermo, young men who were making a fortune out of the post-war construction boom in that city. With this wealth, they were trying to encroach on the country's fiefs of old-time mafia leaders, who they contemptuously labeled Mustache Pete's. Don Tomasino was kept busy defending his domain, and so Michael was deprived of the old man's company and had to be content with Dr. Taza's stories, which were beginning to repeat themselves. One morning, Michael decided to take a long hike to the mountains beyond Corleone. He was naturally accompanied by the 2 shepherd bodyguards. This was not really a protection against enemies of the Corleone family. It was simply too dangerous for anyone not a native to go wandering about by himself. It was dangerous enough for a native. The region was loaded with bandits, with mafia partisans fighting against each other and endangering everybody else in the process. He might also be mistaken for a pagliaio thief. A pagliaio is a straw-thatched hut erected in the fields to house farming tools and to provide shelter for the agricultural laborers so that they will not have to carry them on the long walk from their homes in the village. In Sicily, the peasant does not live on the land he cultivates. It is too dangerous, and any arable land, if he owns it, is too precious. Rather, he lives in his village and at sunrise begins his voyage out to work in distant fields, a commuter on foot. A worker who arrived at his pagliaio and found it looted was an injured man indeed. The bread was taken out of his mouth for that day. The mafia, after the law proved helpless, took this interest of the peasant under its protection and solved the problem in typical fashion. It hunted down and slaughtered all pagliaio thieves. It was inevitable that some innocents suffered. It was possible that if Michael wandered past a Pagleo that had just been looted, he might be adjudged the criminal unless he had somebody to vouch for him. So on one sunny morning, he started hiking across the fields, followed by his two faithful shepherds. One of them was a plain, simple fellow, almost moronic, silent as the dead and with a face as impassive as an Indian. He had the wiry, small build of the typical Sicilian before they ran to the fat of the village age, or before they ran to the fat of village age. His name was Calo. His name was Calo, or Calo, I think Calo. The other shepherd was more outgoing, younger, and had been something of the world, mostly oceans, since he had been a sailor in the Italian Navy during the war and had just had time enough to get himself tattooed before his ship was sunk and he was captured by the British. But the tattoo made him a famous man in his village. Sicilians do not often let themselves be tattooed. They do not have the opportunity nor the inclination. The shepherd Fabrizio had done so primarily to cover a splotchy red birthmark on his belly. Yet the mafia market carts had gaily painted scenes on their sides, beautifully primitive paintings done with loving care. In any case, Fabrizio, back in his native village, was not too proud of that tattoo on his chest, though it showed a subject dear to the Sicilian honor, a husband stabbing a naked man and woman entwined together on the hairy floor of his belly, about America, for of course it was impossible to keep them in the dark about his true nationality. Still, but they did not know exactly who he was, except that he was in hiding and there could be no babbling about him. Fabrizio sometimes brought Michael a fresh cheese, still sweating the milk that formed it. They walked along dusty country roads, passing donkeys pulling gaily painted carts. The land was filled with pink flowers, orange orchards, groves of almond and olive trees, all blooming. That had been one of the surprises. Michael had expected a barren land because of the legendary poverty of Sicilians, yet he had found it a land of gushing plenty, carpeted with flowers scented by lemon blossoms. It was so beautiful that he wondered how its people could bear to leave it. How terrible man had been to his fellow man could be measured by the great exodus from what seemed to be a Garden of Eden. He had planned to walk to the coastal village of Mazzara and then take a bus back to Corleone in the evening and so tire himself out and be able to sleep. The two shepherds wore rucksacks filled with bread and cheese they could eat on the way. They carried their lupadas quite openly as if out for a day's hunting. It was a most beautiful morning. Michael felt as he had felt when, as a child, he had gone out early on a summer day to play ball. Then each day had been freshly washed, freshly painted, and so it was now. Sicily was carpeted in gaudy flowers, the scent of orange and lemon blossom so heavy that even with his facial injury which pressed on the sinuses, he could smell it. The smashing on the left side of his face had completely healed, but the bone had formed improperly, and the pressure on his sinuses made his left eye hurt. It also made his nose run continually. He filled up handkerchiefs with mucus and often blew his nose out onto the ground, as the local peasants did, a habit that had disgusted him when he was a boy and had seen old Italians disdaining handkerchiefs as English foppery, blow out their noses in the asphalt gutters. His face, too, felt heavy. Dr. Taza had told him that this was due to the pressure on his sinuses caused by the badly healed fracture. Dr. Taza called it an eggshell fracture of the zygoma, that if it had been treated before the bones knitted, it could have been easily remedied by a minor surgical procedure using an instrument like a spoon to push out the bone to its proper shape. Now, however, said the doctor, he would have to check into a Palermo hospital and undergo a major procedure called maxillofacial surgery where the bone would be broken again. That was enough for Michael. He refused, and yet more than the pain, more than the nose dripping, he was bothered by the feeling of heaviness in his face. He never reached the coast that day. After going about 15 miles, he and his shepherds stopped in the cool green watery shade of an orange grove to eat lunch and drink their wine. Fabrizio was chattering about how he would someday get to America. After drinking and eating, they lolled in the shade, and Fabrizio's unbuttoned his shirt and contracted his stomach muscles to make the tattoo come alive. The naked couple on his chest writhed in a lover's agony, and the dagger thrust by the husband quivered in their transfixed flesh. It amused them. It was while this was going on that Michael was hit with what the Sicilians call the thunderbolt. Beyond the orange grove lay the green ribboned fields of a baronial estate. Down the road from the grove was a villa so Roman it looked as if it had been dug up from the ruins of Pompeii. It was a little palace with a huge marble portico and fluted Grecian columns, and through those columns came a bevy of village girls flanked by two stout matrons clad in black. They were from the village and had obviously fulfilled their ancient duty to the local baron by cleaning his villa and otherwise preparing it for his winter sojourn. Now they were going into the fields to pick the flowers with which they would fill the rooms. They were gathering the pink sulla, purple wisteria, mixing them with orange and lemon blossoms. The girls, not seeing the men resting in the orange grove, came closer and closer. They were dressed in cheap, gaily printed frocks that clung to their bodies. They were still in their teens, but with the full womanliness sun-drenched flesh ripened into so quickly. 3 or 4 of them started chasing one girl, chasing her toward the grove. The girl being chased had a bunch of huge purple grapes in her left hand, and with her right hand was picking grapes off the cluster and throwing them at her pursuers. She had a crown of ringleted hair as purple-black as the grapes, and her body seemed to be bursting out of its skin. Just short of the grove she poised, startled, her eyes having caught the alien color of the men's shirts. She stood there up on her toes, poised like a deer to run. She was very close now, close enough for the men to see every feature of her face. She was all ovals, oval-shaped eyes, the bones of her face, the contour of her brow. Her skin was an exquisite dark creaminess, and her eyes, enormous, dark violet or brown, but dark with long heavy lashes, shadowed her lovely face. Her mouth was rich without being gross, sweet without being weak, and dyed dark red with the juice of the grapes. She was so incredibly lovely that Fabrizio murmured, "Jesus Christ, take my soul, I'm dying," as a joke, but the words came out a little too honest, or a little too hoarsely. As if she had heard him, the girl came down off her toes and whirled away from them and fled back to her pursuers. Her haunches moved like an animal's beneath the tight print of her dress, as pagan and as innocently lustful. When she reached her friend, she whirled around again, and her face was like a dark hollow against the field of bright colors. She extended an arm, the handful of grapes pointed toward the grove. The girls fled laughing, with a black-clad, stout matron scolding them on. As for Michael Corleone, he found himself standing, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt a little dizzy. The blood was surging through his body, through all his extremities, and pounding against the tips of his fingers. The tips of his toes, all the perfumes of the island came rushing in on the wind. Orange, lemon blossoms, grapes, flowers. It seemed as if his body had sprung away from him, out of himself, and then he heard the 2 shepherds laughing. "You got hit by the thunderbolt, eh?" Fabrizio said, clapping him on the shoulder. Even Callo became friendly, patting him on the arm and saying, "Easy, man, easy," but with affection, as if Michael had been hit by a car. Fabrizio handed him a wine bottle, and Michael took a long slug. It cleared his throat. "What the hell are you damn sheep lovers talking about?" he said. Both men laughed. Callo, his honest face filled with the utmost seriousness, said, "You can't hide the thunderbolt. When it hits you, everybody can see it. Christ, man, don't be ashamed of it. Some men pray for the thunderbolt. You're a lucky fellow." Michael wasn't too pleased about his emotions being so easily read, but this was the first time in his life such a thing had happened to him. It was nothing like his adolescent crushes. It was nothing like the love he had for Kay, a love based as much on her sweetness, her intelligence, and the polarity of the fair and dark. This was an overwhelming desire for possession. This was an inerasable printing of the girl's face on his brain, and he knew she would haunt his memory every day of his life if he did not possess her. His life had become simplified, focused on one point. Everything else was unworthy of even a moment's attention. During his exile, he had always thought of Kay, though he felt that they could never again be lovers or even friends. He was, after all, was said, a murderer, a mafioso who had made his bones, but now Kay was wiped completely out of his consciousness. Fabrizio said briskly, "I'll go to the village, we'll find out about her. Who knows, she may be more available than we think. There's only one cure for the thunderbolt, eh, Gallo?" So Fabrizio's saying, like, there's only one cure, huh, Gallo? The other shepherd nodded his head gravely. Michael didn't say anything. He followed the 2 shepherds as they started down the road to the nearby village into which the flock of girls had disappeared. The village was grouped around the usual central square with its fountain, but it was on a main route, so there were some stores, wine shops, and one little cafe with 3 tables out on a small terrace. The shepherds sat at one of the tables, and Michael joined them. There was no sign of the girls, not a trace. The village seemed deserted except for small boys and a meandering donkey, like a walking donkey that's not on some sort of rope or anything. So the proprietor of the cafe came to serve them. He was a short, burly man, almost dwarfish, but he greeted them cheerfully and set a dish of chickpeas at their table. "You are strangers here," he said, "so let me advise you, try my wine. The grapes come from my own farm, and it's made by my sons themselves. They mix it with oranges and lemons. It's the best wine in Italy." They let him bring the wine in a jug, and it was even better than he claimed, dark purple and as powerful as brandy. Fabrizio said to the cafe proprietor, Or he's pretty much asking him. So Fabrizio tells the cafe proprietor, the cafe owner, "You know all the girls here, I bet. You know all the girls here, I'll bet. We saw some beauties coming down the road. One in particular got our friend here hit with a thunderbolt." He motioned to Michael. The cafe owner looked at Michael with new interest. The cracked face had seemed quite ordinary to him before, not worth a second glance. But a man hit with the thunderbolt was another matter. "You had better bring a few bottles home with you, my friend," he said. "You'll need help in getting to sleep tonight." Michael asked the man, "Do you know a girl with her hair all curly, very creamy skin, very big eyes, very dark eyes? Do you know a girl like that in the village?" The cafe owner said curtly, "No, I don't know any girl like that." He vanished from the terrace into his cafe. The three men drank their wine slowly, finished off the jug, and called for more. The owner did not reappear. Fabrizio went into the cafe after him. When Fabrizio came out, he grimaced and said to Michael, "Just as I thought, it's his daughter we were talking about, and now he's in the back boiling up his blood to do us a mischief. Now he's in the back boiling up his blood to do us mischief. I think we better start walking toward Corleone." Despite his months on the island, Michael still cannot get used to the Sicilian touchiness on matters of sex. And this was extreme even for a Sicilian, but the two shepherds seemed to take it as a matter of course. They were waiting for him to leave. Fabrizio said, "The old bastard mentioned he has 2 sons, big tough lads that he has only to whistle up. Let's get going." Michael gave him a cold stare. Up to now, he had been a quiet, gentle young man, a typical American, except that since he was hiding in Sicily, he must have done something manly. This was the first time the shepherds had seen the Corleone stare. Dom Tomasino, knowing Michael's true identity indeed, had always been wary of him, treating him as a fellow man of respect. But these unsophisticated sheep herders had come to their own opinion of Michael, and not a wise one. The cold look, Michael's rigid white face, his anger that came off him like cold smoke off ice, sobered their laughter and snuffed out their familiar friendliness. When he saw he had their proper, respectful attention, Michael said to them, "Get that man out here for me." They didn't hesitate. They shouldered their lupadas and went into the dark coolness of the cafe. A few seconds later, they reappeared with the cafe owner between them. The stubby man looked in no way frightened, but his anger had a certain wariness about it. Michael leaned back in his chair and studied the man for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "I understand I've offended you by talking about your daughter. I offer you my apologies. I'm a stranger in this country. I don't know the customs that well. Let me say this. I meant no disrespect to you or her." The shepherd bodyguards were impressed. Michael's voice had never sounded like this before, even when speaking to them. There was command and authority in it, though he was making an apology. The cafe owner shrugged, more wary still, knowing he was not dealing with some farm boy. "Who are you, and what do you want from my daughter?" I'm going to highlight what Michael said. Without even hesitating, Michael said, "I am an American hiding in Sicily from the police of my country. My name is Michael. You can inform the police and make your fortune, but then your daughter will lose a father rather than gain a husband. In any case, I want to meet your daughter. With your permission and under the supervision of your family, with all decorum, with all respect, I'm an honorable man, and I don't think of dishonoring your daughter. I want to meet her, talk to her, and then if it hits us both right, we'll marry. If not, you'll never see me again. She may find me unsympathetic after all, and no man can remedy that, but when the proper time comes, I'll tell you everything about me that a wife's father should know." You might be saying this because he has the backing of his father, but nonetheless, All three men were looking at him with amazement. Fabrizio whispered in awe, "It's the real Thunderbolt." Oh, that's fucking funny. The cafe owner for the first time didn't look so confident or contemptuous. His anger was not so sure. Finally he asked, "Are you a friend of the friends?" Since the word mafia could never be uttered aloud by the ordinary Sicilian, this was as close as the cafe owner could come to asking if Michael was a member of the mafia. It was the usual way of asking if someone belonged, but it was ordinarily not addressed to the person directly concerned. "No," Michael said, "I'm a stranger in this country." The cafe owner gave him another look, the smashed left side of his face, the long legs rare in Sicily. He took a look at the two shepherds carrying their lupadas quite openly without fear, and remembered how they had come into his cafe and told him their padrone wanted to talk to him. The cafe owner had snarled that he wanted the son of a bitch out of his terrace, and one of the shepherds had said, "Take my word, it's best you go out and speak to him yourself." And something had made him come out. Now something made him realize that it would be best to show this stranger some courtesy. He said grudgingly, "Come Sunday afternoon. My name is Vitali, and my house is up there on the hill above the village. But come here to the cafe and I'll take you up." But it sucks. Like, you don't want your daughter to be with a guy like that. So it's kind of like the curse of beauty, you know? Fabrizio started to say something, but Michael gave him one look, and the shepherd's tongue froze in his mouth. This was not lost on Vitali. So when Michael stood up and stretched out his hand, the cafe owner took it and smiled. He'll make some inquiries, and if the answers were wrong, he could always greet Michael with his two sons and bearing their own shotguns. The cafe owner was not without his contacts among the friends of the friends, but something told him this was one of those wild strokes of good fortune that Sicilians always believed in. Something told him that his daughter's beauty would make her fortune and her family secure. And it was just as well. Some of the local youths were already beginning to buzz around, and the stranger with his broken face could do the necessary job of scaring them off. Vitali, to show his goodwill, or some of the local youths were already beginning to buzz around, meaning like she's attractive, you know. Vitali, to show his goodwill, sent the strangers off with a bottle of his best and coldest wine. He noticed that one of the shepherds paid the bill. This impressed him even more, made it clear that Michael was the superior of the two men who accompanied him. Michael was no longer interested in his hike. They found a garage and hired a car and driver to take them back to Corleone, and some time before supper, Dr. Taza must have been informed by the shepherds of what had happened. That evening, sitting in the garden, Dr. Taza said to Don Tomasino, "Our friend got hit by the thunderbolt today." I think that's a perfect place to stop. Perfect. I don't know what it's called, but a perfect place to transition to the next video since we're already 30 minutes deep. So he got hit by the thunderbolt. As men, we can all relate to that, huh? It's beautiful. In a fucked up way, you know?